So let's pick up right where we left off. The Time Machine, Chapter 10, Part 2. The time traveler paused, put his hand into his pocket, and silently placed two withered flowers, not unlike very large white mallows, upon the little table. Then he resumed his narrative. As the hush of the evening crept over the world, and we proceeded over the hill crest towards Wimbledon, Weena grew tired and wanted to return to the house of grey stone. But I pointed out the distant pinnacles of the palace of green porcelain to her, and contrived to make her understand that we were seeking a refuge there from her fear. You know that great pause that comes upon things before the dusk? Even the breeze stops in the trees. To me, there is always an air of expectation about that evening stillness. The sky was clear, remote, and empty save for a few horizontal bars far down in the sunset. Well, that night the expectation took the color of my fears. In the darkling calm, my senses seemed preternaturally sharpened. I fancied I could even feel the hollowness of the ground beneath my feet, could, indeed, almost see through it the Morlocks on their ant-hill going hither and thither and waiting for the dark. In my excitement, I fancied that they would receive my invasion of their burrows as a declaration of war. And why had they taken my time machine? So at this point, the author's just kind of building suspense for something to come, because even the time traveler's talking about, you can kind of feel this air of expectation that's coming. Something is going to happen. So we went on in the quiet, and the twilight deepened into night. The ground grew dim and the trees black. The clear blue of the distance faded, and one star after another came out. Weena's fears and her fatigue grew upon her. I took her in my arms and talked to her and caressed her. Then, as the darkness grew deeper, she put her arms round my neck and, closing her eyes, tightly pressed her face against my shoulder. So we went down a long slope into a valley, and there in the dimness I almost walked into a little river. This I waded, and went up the opposite side of the valley, past a number of sleeping houses, and by a statue, a faun or some such figure, minus the head. Here, too, were Asius. So far I had seen nothing of the Morlocks, but it was yet early in the night, and the darker hours before the old moon rose were still to come. From the brow of the next hill I saw a thick wood spreading wide and black before me. I hesitated at this. I could see no end to it, either to the right or the left. Feeling tired, my feet in particular were very sore. I carefully lowered Weena from my shoulder as I halted, and sat down upon the turf. I could no longer see the palace of green porcelain, and I was in doubt of my direction. I looked into the thickness of the wood and thought of what it might hide. Under the dense tangle of branches, one would be out of sight of the stars. Even were there no other lurking danger, a danger I did not care to let my imagination loose upon, there would still be all the roots to stumble over and the tree boles to strike against. I was very tired, too, after the excitements of the day. So I decided that I would not face it, but would pass the night upon the open hill. So as they're kind of journeying up towards this woods, past the palace of green porcelain, the time traveler's more worried about the danger coming that's hidden in the wood, because you can't even see the stars. It would be too dark. The Morlocks might get them. So he decides to, spend the night on an open hill, because at least they have some light out there with the stars. Weena, I was glad to find, was fast asleep. I carefully wrapped her in my jacket and sat down beside her to wait for the moonrise. The hillside was quiet and deserted, but from the black of the wood there came now and then a stir of living things. Above me shone the stars, for the night was very clear. I felt a certain sense of friendly comfort in their twinkling. All the old constellations had gone from the sky, however. That slow movement which is imperceptible in 100 human lifetimes, had long since rearranged them in unfamiliar groupings. But the Milky Way, it seemed to me, was still the same tattered streamer of stardust as of yore. Southward, as I judged it, was a very bright red star that was new to me. It was even more splendid than our own Gree Sirius. And amid all the scintillating points of light, one bright planet shone kindly and steadily, like the face of an old friend. Looking at these stars suddenly dwarfed my own troubles and all the gravities of terrestrial life. I thought of their unfathomable distance and the slow inevitable drift of their movements out of the unknown past into the unknown future. I thought of the great processional cycle that the pole of Earth describes. Only 40 times had that silent revolution occurred during all the years that I had traversed. And during these few revolutions, all the activity, all the traditions, the complex organizations, the nations, languages, literatures, aspirations, even the mere memory of man as I knew him, had been swept out of existence. Instead, were these frail creatures who had forgotten their high ancestry and the white things of which I went in terror. Then I thought of the great fear that was between the two species, and for the first time, with a sudden shiver, came the clear knowledge of what the meat I had seen might be. Yet it was too horrible. I looked at little Weena sleeping beside me, her face white and star-like under the stars, and forthwith dismissed the thought. So in this paragraph, the narrator's kind of, the time traveler's doing some reflecting on the past and how the sky has changed and the world is so very different, and how everything that had come before it, all the activity, the traditions, the organizations, the nations, the people, the languages, all that stuff is gone, and it's a completely new world with two species. And then he's beginning to think about the Morlocks and what the meat might be. And he says it looking at Weena, saying it's too horrible. So we can kind of infer that he thinks the meat the Morlocks were eating, it might be the Eloi. It might be people like little Weena. So let's continue. Through the long night, I held my mind off the Morlocks as well as I could, and whiled away the time by trying to fancy I could find signs of the old constellations in the new confusion. The sky kept very clear, except for a hazy cloud or so. No doubt I dozed at times. Then, as my vigil wore on, came faintness in the eastward sky, like the reflection of some colorless fire, and the old moon rose, thin and peaked with white, and close behind, and overtaking it, and overflowing it, the dawn came, pale at first, and then glowing pink and warm. No Morlocks had approached us. Indeed, I had seen none upon the hill that night, and in the confidence of renewed day, it almost seemed to me that my fear had been unreasonable. I stood up and found my foot with the loose heel swollen at the ankle and painful under the heel. So I sat down again, took off my shoes, and flung them away. I wakened Weena, and we went down into the wood, now green and pleasant instead of black and forbidding. We found some fruit wherewith to break our fast. We soon met others of the dainty ones, laughing and dancing in the sunlight, as though there were no such thing in nature as the night. And then I thought once more of the meat that I had seen. I felt assured now of what it was, and from the bottom of my heart I pitied this last feeble rill of the great flood of humanity. Clearly, at some time in the long ago of human decay, the Morlocks' food had run short. Possibly they had lived on rats and such like vermin. Even now, man is far less discriminating and exclusive in his food than he was, far less than any monkey. His prejudice against human flesh is no deep-seated instinct. And so these inhuman sons of men, I tried to look at the thing in a scientific spirit. After all, they were less human and more remote than our cannibal ancestors of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. and the intelligence that would have made this state of things a torment had gone. Why should I trouble myself? These Eloi were mere fatted cattle, which the ant-like Morlocks preserved and preyed upon, probably saw to the breeding of. And there was Weena, dancing at my side. So here we go. We have kind of the confirmation of what we were thinking about in the previous sections. That, yup, the Eloi, they're just cattle to the Morlocks. The Morlocks kind of wait until night, wait until the Eloi are in these dark places, and they feed on them. Then I tried to preserve myself from the horror that was coming upon me by regarding it as a rigorous punishment of human selflessness. Man had been content to live in ease and delight upon the labors of his fellow man, had taken necessity at his watchword and excuse, and in the fullness of time necessity had come home to him. I even tried a Carlyle-like scorn of this wretched aristocracy in decay. But this attitude of mine was impossible. However great their intellectual degradation, the Eloi had kept too much of the human form not to claim my sympathy, and to make me perforce a sharer in their degradation and their fear. So this paragraph I find particularly fascinating because he actually says from a scientific standpoint, it's the Eloi's fault because they had kind of gotten used to living in ease and delight, and the only reason they could live that way, just kind of frolicking around and dealing with these flowers, was because of the labors of his fellow man. They were just used to the Morlocks taking care of them. And they were fine, even though the Morlocks were in such a horrible state that they were starving, that they, had to maybe live on rats, live on such vermin, but the Eloi never helped them out. And so it's actually kind of their fault that they never helped the Morlocks, and so the Morlocks became to feed on the Eloi. But, because the Eloi are still kind of, human form, as he says right here, he still is sympathetic towards the Eloi and not so much towards the Morlocks. So even though he's kind of saying it's the Eloi's fault, they didn't take care of their brother, they didn't take care of their fellow man, he still sympathizes with the Eloi because they look a lot more human. So it's very, very interesting. In fact, that, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, might be a discussion topic. So let's finish this chapter here. We only got one more paragraph. I had at that time very vague ideas as to the course I should pursue. My first was to secure some safe place of refuge, and to make myself such arms of metal or stone as I could contrive. That necessity was immediate. In the next place, I hoped to procure some means of fire, so that I should have the weapon of a torch at hand, for nothing I knew would be more efficient against these Morlocks. Then I wanted to arrange some contrivance to break open the doors of bronze under the White Sphinx. I had in mind a battering ram. I had a persuasion that if I could enter these doors and carry a blaze of light before me, I should discover the time machine and escape. I could not imagine the Morlocks were strong enough to move it far away. Weena and I had resolved to bring with me to our own time. And turning such schemes over in my mind, I pursued our way towards the building which my fancy had chosen as our dwelling. So again, this last paragraph, he just kind of goes over the plan. He's going to make a fire, so he has a torch, because the Morlocks can't stand the light. They've been underground so long. He wants to break open this White Sphinx, where he believes his time machine is, with a battering ram, and he's going to take Weena with him to his own time. So which is interesting, if we're really thinking and predicting now, was he successful? No, he wasn't, because otherwise Weena would be with him right now as he's telling his story to all those people. All right, that's the end of chapter 10, and I hope you enjoyed it, found it useful, and I'll see you in the next video.